This video is best viewed full screen. Click on the full screen icon at the bottom of your screen to go full screen. The Presentation Manager is a great tool to look at a large number of profile graphs at the same time. Let's take a look. I'll open the Presentation Manager by clicking here on this toolbar button. I think the best way to introduce you to the Presentation Manager is to show you an example presentation that I previously created. Earlier today, I created a presentation and saved it in a zip file. I'll click on File and then Import Zipped Presentation. After you've installed the latest version of RSpec on your computer, you'll find this file on your machine too, here in the Documents RSpec Sample Spectra folder. So you can play with the data after you've watched this video. Okay, let's open it. There it is. A big benefit of the Presentation Manager that you can probably already see is that we can now display up to 20 profiles at the same time rather than just 2 profiles like in the past. This collection of spectra may look familiar to some of you, or maybe you spotted it in the file name when I selected it. This presentation uses the reference data in RSpec and shows the profile of each of the major star types in temperature order. That's "Oh, be a fine goose, kick me" order. Over here in the legend, we can see the names of the star types. As I hover my mouse over each legend line, the corresponding graph line lights up. For example, this type M star is the coolest star type. Notice that it has relatively more energy in the red end than in the blue end of the spectrum. And on the other hand, this hot type O star has more energy in the blue end than the red end. Also notice that this hydrogen beta feature is strongest in this type A star and very weak in the hot type O star and not even visible in the cooler stars like the type M and type K. The existence of certain features like this in a spectrum is of course how professional astronomers identify star types. A fun project for you might be to capture the spectrum of each star type using your equipment and then display them like this. So, how did I create this presentation? Hold on, I'm going to show you step by step. First, I'm going to go to Tools and Clear All Rows. And I'm going to go to the Appearance screen and click Reset to Default. Great. Now we've got a blank slate to work with. Okay, let's get started. Let's start by opening the reference library in RSpec. As you know, this is a collection of spectra for many different star types. It's from a published professional library called the Pickles Library. By the way, you may find it interesting to read the original publication of the Pickles Library. Click on this button to see the PDF online. Okay, where were we? Okay, I was just pointing out that RSpec comes with a complete reference library which has a set of profiles for each star type. And they've all been corrected for instrument response. We're going to use these spectra from the Pickles library in the Presentation Manager. Let's see how. This button here is how we can load profiles into the Presentation Manager. They can be .dat files or FITS1D files. And these files come from either third parties like the AVSO, BESS, or BAA databases. Or, of course, you can create these files from your own data using this antiquated floppy button. To create an "Oh, be a fine goose, kick me" view, we're going to use the profiles from the Pickles reference library data. Of course, rather than using this professional data, it could be your own data. Okay, so let's load our first profile. I'll click on the button and then navigate to the RSpec reference library folder. On my machine and yours, it will be under Documents RSpec in the reference library folder. I'm going to start with a cool star, a type M star. Okay, there's its profile. And notice that the file name also appears in this column. We'll get back to that later. So now I need to load all of the other profiles in temperature order. One way to do that would be to click on the same button and select the next hotter star type, a type K star. I could come back to this screen repeatedly and load one at a time. Or on this screen, I can select more than one file at a time by holding the Control key down and clicking on each profile that I want to load. But there's a problem with that because RSpec will display the profiles in alphabetical order in the presentation manager. Of course, OB, a fine goose kick me order, isn't alphabetical, it's temperature order. So we have to do one file at a time. However, there's yet another way to do this. When I rehearsed this video before recording it, I loaded the same files. RSpec lists recently loaded files here under this arrow. In this list of recently used files, let's pick a K, and now a G, and an F. Notice they're loading here. An A, a B, and an O star. Okay, there they all are, but it's a pretty boring display so far, isn't it? Let's start by adding some color. I'll start on this type M star. I can click in the row in the grid to select the row, or I can click on the actual profile line in the data itself. Then I'll click in the ellipsis in the color column, and then I'll choose a color for this line. I've chosen red here since this is a cool type M star. So now all I have to do is run through the rest of the colors. Of course, I'm choosing colors that are close to the temperature of each star type. Hang in there. It takes a few moments to get all these in, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so now we have the colors all set. That's beginning to look pretty good, isn't it? But clearly the graph still needs a little bit of work, doesn't it? Here's where it gets fun. What we want to do is slide these graph lines up vertically, separating them from each other. And that's what this Offset tab over here does. I can drag this slider with my mouse like this. And if you go too far, just click on this Reset All button and do it again. I can also use my keyboard's arrow and page up down keys to move the slider once I've clicked in the slider somewhere to select it. As I move the slider with the page up key on my keyboard, the offset between all the profiles increases. For this presentation, we don't want any of the lines crossing one another, so I'm keeping my eye on this region where they're close. Well, there. For all but the red line, the lines don't cross. So let's keep going so the red line doesn't cross any lines either. Well, there it is. The red line isn't crossing any lines, but we have so much spacing between the other lines that given RSpec's automatic scaling of the y-axis, the other lines are almost smooth and their general shape has been hidden. This really isn't very good presentation anymore, is it? It's as if we zoomed out too far. So let me reset the offsets with this button, and then I'll move the offset slider so everything looks good except that troublesome red type M star. Those M stars sure are rowdy troublemakers, aren't they? One quick technical note here. This offset slider is disabled when you're on the bottom row, because offsetting the bottom row doesn't make any sense. After all, what would you offset it from? Okay, so now none of the lines but the red line cross each other. Perhaps this is how you want to leave it, since it most accurately represents the data, and it preserves each profile's general shape, called the spectral energy distribution, or SED. But since we're making a presentation here, we get to decide how we'd like to present the data. And my preference here is to not to have that red line crossing any of the others. And that's what this Scale tab is for. On this tab, the slider adjusts just one profile line at a time. So let's select the red data. And of course, I can click on the row in the grid, or I can actually click on the red profile line, either one. Having selected the row I want to adjust, I can use the slider. Watch the red line here. Okay, now none of the lines cross one another. Yes, we've changed the general shape of the type M star profile in red, but now the presentation does a better job of preserving the shape of the other profiles. Clearly, there are trade-offs in different approaches. And in a moment, we'll see a great workaround to avoid these trade-offs. Finally, let's annotate the graph on the appearance screen. This process is the same as it's always been. For example, I can open the appearance screen and label this hydrogen beta line. Because in the presentation manager you have so many lines, we've added the ability to anchor a label to any of the lines, not just the red profile line. An anchored label moves with its line. I want to put my labels up here at the top, so I'll anchor them to the line at the top, this blue line. To anchor a label, simply select the line before you enter the wavelength. Here I'll click on the blue line. Now let's type in a more exact wavelength, 4861.3. And of course, the usual functions are available here to change the label text to say H, and then to the right click and add beta, and add vertical lines, etc. So why did I say a moment ago that clicking on the graph line first to anchor the label rather than just entering the wavelength? Because now the label is anchored on the blue profile. When the blue profile line moves, the label moves with it. Let me show you that. To make it easier to see, I'm going to turn off RSpec's auto scale checkbox and zoom so that I can see everything. Now watch as I move the blue line. The label moves with it because it's anchored to the line. Now the final thing here I want to show you is that in the rare event that you want to know what profile line a particular label is anchored to, just hover your mouse over the wavelength label here, and RSpec will show you. In this case, we can see it's showing that this label is anchored to profile 6. We've just spent a lot of time using the scale and the offset sliders to adjust the layout in a presentation. And that's an important ability so that we can preserve the spectral energy distribution, the SED, of the line. But you know what? Rather than SED, most of the time we're more interested in the actual absorption and emission features of the spectrum. And there's always been a way in RSpec to remove SED effects, and that's what I'll show you in the next video. You can now use the full screen icon to leave full screen mode.